For centuries, immigrants have arrived on American shores with no more than a suitcase and a dream of a better life. The promise of freedom and individuality continues to lure foreigners into the United States. The Statue of Liberty continues to be seen as a universal symbol of freedom. As first-generation Americans, the freedoms embodied in the Statue of Liberty are the primary reason why we, the authors, are here today, and why the idea of the American dream still lives on in every one of us, just as it did in our parents who sought out the American dream. The freedoms present in the United States include the right to a voice in politics, the ability to express one's personal identity and culture, the ability to speak freely without the fear of persecution. While some may argue that these qualities are still limited in the American society, especially in terms of social standing, the opposite is true, and all of these qualities are legally accomplishable. Based on these qualities that created the American dream and its freedoms, the so-called American dream still lives on as a dream.
States is founded on four basic inalienable rights that have been challenged and frowned upon throughout the life of America. One of the most precious rights is the freedom of speech, which allows anybody to speak freely without the fear of federal consequences. Since even before the United States declared their independence from Great Britain, the right to speak was challenged among the colonies, which have caused many philosophers to question the basic rights of human, thus beginning the Enlightenment era. In the past, certain acts prohibited this freedom, mainly during times of war where the government had no time to deal with the opposing viewpoints of citizens. The Sedition and Espionage Acts of the 1910s are prime examples of when the government tried to silence the people over their opinions during World War I. Over the course of many years, protests have slowly begun to be seen in a positive light rather than a way to exploit the government. During the 1960s and 1970s, protest over the Vietnam War was more accepted in the eyes of government. The 1969 Tinker versus Des Moines case involves students wearing black armbands to protest against the Vietnam War. The Supreme Court ruled that students do have the right to speak. The extent to which the government will protect your right to speak is often overlooked and frowned upon. In the areas of the world where freedom of speech is not protected, citizens are afraid to speak against their government, even when it acts illegally, for fear of being locked away in a cell for life. Here, you will not get beat, lynched, exiled, or persecuted by your own government for protecting your own ideas. Many believe that the freedom of speech becomes more of a conflict when the opinion expressed is either not reciprocated by the majority or the message may be linked to something someone might associate as wrong. However, as Robert Richards, the founding director of the Pennsylvania Center for the First Amendment at Penn State, many people are mistaken in their belief that offensive or hate speech is not protected. But the Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed the notion that unpopular speech enjoys full First Amendment protection, proving that even speech that is not part of popular opinion is accepted in society. Over time, America has grown to accept all opinions of its citizens, ensuring that American citizens will continue to have freedom in expressing their voice.
As
societal values and the composition of the American public had changed, the political freedoms an individual has grown immensely. Forming the crux of the American dream, political freedoms such as the right to vote for office, bearing positions in the government, and the right for a citizen to serve on these positions have greatly expanded over American history, leading for many minority groups to be able to gain these democratic rights. When looking back into past events of American history, America was a nation founded on an ideal of a democratic society, especially after the American Revolution. However, these democratic abilities were only given to white landowning males, excluding large parts of the rest of American citizens. In order to quell this injustice, many minority groups rose to bring political rights to themselves as well. The first effort was seen by African Americans who had gained voting rights in 1869 with the passage of the 15th Amendment. However, there were still many barriers for people of color to vote, and in order to bring more widespread political rights, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was instituted to prevent barriers in who could vote. Alongside the fight of African Americans for suffrage, the women's suffrage movement also rose in prominence, and it gained the 19th Amendment in 1920, now giving almost all American citizens an active role in political activities. After this rich history of fighting for political rights, today America is rated 16 out of 16 in terms of political pluralism and participation, and is rated 1 out of 7, 1 being the best in terms of civil liberties of citizens, Freedom House. Today's political freedom is expressed in popular culture as well, especially in many novels. In the novel Funny and Farsi, Firoze Dumas highlights her freedoms in America, and her father's favorite freedom is democratic freedom. He says in the novel, any immigrant who comes to this country and becomes a citizen and doesn't vote, according to him, should just go back. They need to be sent for 6 months to a non-democratic country, then they'll vote. Dumas 118, expressing the contrast between political freedom in America versus in other countries. As expressed in the novel, America's democracy and political freedom is one of the main forces attracting immigrants to the nation. America is one of the few nations with widespread democracy and trusting its citizens a part in government, which proves that in today's day and age, America is very free in terms of political rights.
Although America has made leaps of progress throughout its history, the question of freedom and the ability to progress in social class, social standing, has become a growing issue today. The initial basis of class was to create a structured hierarchy in order to organize the country's distribution of wealth. Yet today, this gap is increasing at an alarming rate. Currently, the lower class is comprised of those that make $7,000 and below annually compared to the upper class average of $100,000 and above. This is about a $97,000 difference, and the effects of this are prevalent. The financial gap creates two separate worlds for those with less luxury than others. Ta-Nehisi Coates furthers this idea by stating, "I knew that my portion of the American galaxy, where bodies were enslaved by tenacious gravity, was black, and the other liberated portion was not," and also highlighting the fact that being confined to this poor title was stifling. We could not get out. The ground we walked was tripwire. The air we breathed was toxic. The water stunted our growth. We could not get out. The wealthy are known to have a greater influence in the country's choices, while those of lower class have little to no voice, although they are a much larger part of the population. There have also been accounts of blatant discrimination of those from lower classes. Redlining, a term derived from the 1930s, occurs to individuals who are deemed to a financial risk by those in charge of loans/insurance. Typically, this is seen in the poorer areas of urban areas and is normally swept under the rug by big businesses, as these areas are largely neglected due to the aforementioned risk. This contributes to the glass ceiling phenomenon, the idea that individuals have a barrier keeping them from attaining certain benefits, mainly due to lack of privilege. In The Grapes of Wrath, we are introduced to the Jodes, a lower-class family that moves out west in search of a better life. Upon arriving to California, they are met with constant belittling and ridiculed by those of higher merit. The novel has been acclaimed for its accurate depiction of societal relationships that can still be mirrored in this day. However, our ability to move throughout the social ladder has largely increased as a part as a whole compared to that of the past. This being one of the primary reasons many are compelled to immigrate to America. It is work ethic that now determines how far you may excel in your social standing, not birthright. In the past, people were born into class, but today there are countless rags to riches stories that show us we are not limited to where we come from. This also begins to form teeny cracks in the glass ceiling, slowly building up the foundation to completely shatter it.
Freedom of personal identity, much like the other freedoms, exists today to protect an individual's lifestyle choices from animosity and bigotry, as well as to encourage self-expression, which has been gained through a continuous fight throughout history by many groups through battles and relentless efforts of racial minorities, women, workers, and other groups to secure freedom. The definition of freedom has been both deepened and transformed to realms for which it was not originally intended. For many years, the LGBT community has been discriminated against until June 28, 1969. When they participated in the Stonewall Riots, a 3-day riot which is now known in history for being the America's modern LGBT rights movement. In spite of the riots, the LGBT community still faced discrimination based on their sexual orientation, but for decades to come, the LGBT community continued to make progress in their fight for personal equality. Finally, on June 26, 2017, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the U.S. Constitution guarantees the right for same-sex couples to marry in all 50 states. For many years, people have been immigrating to the United States in search of this freedom, a freedom of cultural identity. Studies show that 70% of our population are multiracial and 8.4% of all marriages are interracial. We as a nation have adapted and accepted these cultures and their beliefs. We have built churches, mosques, and temples for our fellow citizens to worship in spite of differences in religion. We celebrate holidays such as Cinco de Mayo and St. Patrick's Day. As a nation, we honor the men and women who fought for equality by making February Black History Month and June the LGBT Pride Month. America's ability to have pride in its own culture and still respect and adapt the rights of others justifies that America is a strong believer in the freedom of personal and cultural identity, a crucial part of the American dream. For many years, society has been debating whether the American dream still lives on. However, by observing the vast amount of freedoms present in America, there is no question that the American dream still continue to uphold for generations to come. An American citizen possesses the freedom of speech, freedom of political rights, and the freedom of cultural and personal identity. While many argue that there are still limitations on the freedom an individual has, America still ensures a great amount of liberty that is not present in many other countries. The great appeal is what drives immigrants to the United States to fulfill the American dream.